Alien and Sedition Acts were the acts that said no bad writings were to be made about the government. Who was involved in the process of these laws? John Adams was the president at the time, but Thomas Jefferson won the election for the Democratic Republicans the next year. John Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Acts into law once they were approved by Congress. Congress was made up of Federalists, and these Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. These laws needed to silence the Democratic Republic because they had too much power compared to the Federalists. The election of 1800, which occurred 2 years after these laws were passed, was a battle between the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. What happened during the time of these acts? After these acts were passed, America couldn't protect against the government, allow immigrants in, have freedom of the press, or have lawmakers jailed. There was no going against the government. Foreigners fled to Europe because they feared being held accountable of anything in the government. These laws challenged the Bill of Rights, but ultimately led to freedom and speech of the press. Rumors of a French invasion frightened the Americans. The Federalists quickly passed 4 laws to keep the United States protected from the possible attack of the French. The 4 Alien and Sedition Acts were the Naturalization Act, which extended the time immigrants had to live in the United States to become citizens anywhere between 5 and 14 years. Since most immigrants favored the Republicans, delaying their citizenship would slow the growth of Jefferson's party. The second act was the Alien Enemies Act, and that said that once war had been declared, all male citizens of an enemy nation could be arrested, detained, and deported. If war had broken out, this act could have expelled many of the estimated 25,000 French citizens living in the United States, but the country did not go to war, and the law was never used. The third law was the Alien Friends Act, and that authorized the president to deport any non-citizens suspected of plotting against the government during either wartime or peacetime. This law could have resulted in the mass expulsion of new immigrants. The act was limited to 2 years, but no alien was ever deported under it. And the fourth and final law is the Sedition Act, which is directly aimed at those who spoke out against the Federalists. This act allowed jury to decide whether the victim was guilty or not. The Alien and Sedition Acts provoked a debate between Republican and Federalist state legislators over freedom of speech and the press. The Naturalization Act was repealed in 1802, and the other 2 were just allowed to expire. The Sedition Act is still in effect today, it just isn't watched as closely. Where were the acts affecting? The United States. John Adams put the act into action, and it affected mainly the southern states like Kentucky and Virginia. It affected the government because Congress and the President were the people that put this act into action. East and southern U.S. states, Kentucky and Virginia, made a resolution that said federal laws weren't allowed in their states. They disagreed with the government. These laws affected all foreigners from entering without permission, which is what they were going for at a time of potential war with France. This affected foreigners greatly. And this all happened right before the election of 1800. When were these acts put into action? 1798 was when they were created. They were used in the 1798 to 1800 elections. John Adams signed the acts during June and July of 1789. The strongest reaction to the passing of the laws came from the South in November and December of 1789. Kentucky and Virginia stated their resolutions. John Adams' criticism grew since passing the acts, and he feared for the future. Then the election of 1800 happened. Why were these acts even needed? Federalists didn't like foreigners very much. They saw foreigners as a threat to American security. The 4 laws were passed to say that no bad writings were to be made about the government. These laws were meant to silence the Democratic Republicans because they got away with more than the Federalists did for a short amount of time. Most of these laws were meant to weaken Jefferson's Democratic Republic Party. Federalists believed that once they elected their political leaders, they shouldn't be publicly criticized. Thomas Jefferson said that the Sedition Acts went against the First Amendment, so the laws had to be passed to silence the Democratic Republicans. The passing of these acts happened because the Federalist Party wanted to weaken the Republicans' power. The French threatened war to occur, so the government quickly came up with these 4 acts. Negative reactions to these acts contributed to the Democratic Republic victory in the 1800 election. These acts needed to take down Jeffersonian republicanism. Laws were designed to control the activities of foreigners in the United States during a time of potential war. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions declared that federal laws were invalid within their state, so the acts caused conflict to be looked into. These laws tried to stop people from putting state rights above government rights.